Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. Andrew here, and today is going to be another music theory breakdown where I've recreated popular songs so that I can hopefully make music theory seem a lot simpler, which it's not that complicated and it helps a ton with your production chops. So we're going to be talking about a track by Pop Smoke today called Woo Baby featuring Chris Brown. Thank you for the request for this one. If you have any songs you'd like to see me break down, just leave it in the comments, and be sure to stay in touch with the channel. It can take me like a month sometimes to get a request out, but I love them, so shoot me a challenge. If you haven't seen one of these before, I don't play the original audio. That's because I don't have the copyright. You're not going to hear any vocals, so this version is going to be a lot shorter. It's going to have all the different elements in the song. We're then going to talk about where these notes come from. If you find these helpful, you would help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel. Without any more delay, here is my recreation of the instrumental for Woo Baby. Alright, and then here comes the outro, where we get this new instrument. Pretty cool. I filter it out. Cool. So if this is your first breakdown, that's actually a pretty good thing, because this song is quite simple. This will be pretty concise. This track, Woo Baby, is in the key of A minor. A minor is the simplest minor scale that there is. It's the simplest because it only has white keys. So if you're on a piano, perhaps you could look up the names of these white keys. You could write them out on the piano. If you play from A to A, you've just played A minor. If you want to be really fancy, you could call this A natural minor. Most people, when they say A minor, they're talking about natural minor. Cool. So A minor from white key A to white key A, only using white keys, sounds like this. All right. Now, a scale is where all of the individual notes that you hear in the song come from. Every single melody note and all of the chords come from these 7 different notes. The first and last one are repeating. That's why you see 8. Now, the chords also come from this. The first chord we have is an E minor. This is called a 5 chord because it's built on the 5th note in A minor. A, B, C, D, E. So an E minor chord. Then we go to a C major. That is built on the 3rd. So we would say this is a 5-3. Then we play the A minor. That's our 1 chord because it's our first note. It has A, C, and E in it. I should mention that every single one of these chords only has notes from the scale, and it's from skipping scale degrees. So for the E minor, it would skip a white key. You get G, skip a white key, and you would have a B right here. So that first chord is E, G, B. All right, then finally we get a 7 chord that's built on the 7th note, that G. It is a G major chord, has the notes G, B, and D in them. But notice that G is not on the bottom. Over here, the B is on the bottom. So that's what we refer to as a chord inversion. Chord inversions, if you're playing the piano, are super helpful because you can keep your hand in similar positions without moving to the right or left a ton. That allows you to not look at your hands as much. And because it's easier, there's this thing in music that the path of least resistance, a fancy way of saying the easiest route from A to B, is usually the route that performers take. So the easiest way to play something, whether it's on guitar, piano, drums, is like typically the way that performers play it. It's not always true. There's some quirky styles out there, but most of the proficient, best players in any style of music are using those kind of efficient tricks. So once again, that chord progression on its own would sound like this. E minor, C major, A minor, G major. Cool. And again, this song is pretty simple. It has the same sort of melody repeating and chord progression. So the chords I just showed you, I have them on 2 layers. I've got an electric piano, just default to Logic. I have that going through some of my bus reverbs. I talk about that in some of my other videos about specific production techniques. And then I have a pad by Isotope. And those notes on their own, they look like this. Now you might notice, well, wait a second, there's 4 notes written here. Some of them are doubled up. So like we have this C major chord, we have the notes C, E, G, and C again. This E minor is inverted, so that's B, E, G, still an E minor chord. Those sound like that, this. That's repeating the whole time. What a lot of you are probably looking for is the main lead. So the notes in the melody are all in key of this A minor. We're going C, B, A, down to E. So both of those notes are extra important to the scale. We've got the 1 and the 5. Those are also found in the main chord of any key, whether it's major, minor, everything aside from the Locrian mode. The actual 1 chord has a 5th built into it, so the 1 and the 5. All right, so C, B, A, E, then up to G. Then it goes G, A, G, A, B, C, and then that basically repeats. The melody on its own sounds like this. So we are at 100 beats per minute, and that melody lasts 2 measures long, and that repeats again the entire song. So nothing really to talk about that aside from rhythmically. We have this what would be called syncopation. Basically what that means is the accent, instead of being on the most important notes, which would be like the rhythms, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. They're on some other version of that. That could be an 8th note other than a downbeat, or in this case, a 16th note other than the downbeat. The specific rhythm, I'm in a 16th note grid. It's a note on the first, on the downbeat, on the 1, then on the last 16th note. If we were to write this out, we could call the first a dotted 8th note, and then this would be a 16th note. Then we're on the following 8th note. This rhythm is really important in all sorts of genres of music. This would be called a triplet, and it's specifically called a quarter note triplet because where we have 2 quarter notes, we have 3 triplet notes. If that makes sense. And then that same rhythm repeats, only we don't get the last one the first time. The second time, we have the same rhythm, only we get it 2 full cycles of the rhythm. So the rhythmic phrase is really 2 measures, since the first time we're not playing the last one. But the actual rhythmic nature of the piece we could talk about just those 3 notes, that dotted 8th into a 16th note, and then the following 8th note. That with the keys doesn't look as good because those are overlapping. Let's look at the melody. I'll play all of that together. Then it repeats. All right, so pretty simple. That's going to cover all of the different notes in the song. Then we get this cool pickup of the scratch sound. It sounds like this right before the drums come in. All right, now this was surprisingly simple to make. I went on to Splice. If you're not familiar with Splice, it's a pretty cool subscription-based service to get samples, and they have a ton of different stuff. It's kind of crazy how many samples there are there. I used to have a ton of samples on external drives that I would use in all my productions, but I still use those from time to time. But I find myself going on a Splice and grabbing samples because it's almost easier than looking for something I have hidden in my files, just going straight to it. And I searched record scratch. I got something. I then flexed it, or I moved these into time so that the scratch was in time with the song. You could literally use your eyes as a guideline when you're doing that, seeing that like this is the original track and this scratch lines up with it pretty closely, enough that it definitely works like the song. So it's 3 of that sample, again moved so it's in this timing, and then just placed in there. And that helps a lot as a pickup into hearing the 808 and the drums. So let's talk about the drums on their own. To start, they sound like this. Now the drums are on a 4 measure sequence, so they don't repeat. This literal pattern doesn't repeat until it's happened 4 times. So we have 3 elements. We've got a closed hi-hat, we've got a kick drum, and we have a clap. All right, the clap is a standard backbeat. If you are familiar with backbeats, or perhaps you have my music theory text, if you don't, the link to get that is below. Basically a super stripped down, simple music theory method. It won't be helpful for those of you that already are competent in rhythms and scales and chord progressions. But if you're just getting into music production, I designed that for you. And in the book, I talk about in popular music, pretty much everything that you or your friends are listening to, unless you're into really obscure music, has a backbeat, and that's played by the snare or the clap. And a standard backbeat is on beat 2 and 4. And that's exactly what's happening. So the clap is on beat 2 and 4 the entire time. The kick is on 1. And then it's on that last note of the 3-note 8th note triplet thing I showed you, or quarter note triplet. That is in time with that. And those are the only 2 kicks we get in the first measure. Then we get a kick on the 8th note after beat 3 in the second measure. This pattern almost repeats. We get a kick on 1, a kick on that same 8th note, so this exact same rhythm happens again, and then we get our kick on the 4th quarter note, and then finally we get the same second measure kick that we had before, so they're almost exactly the same. Only difference is that we get that additional kick the first time it passes, that kick being on the 8th note after the 3rd quarter note. All right, without the cymbals, that's kick and clap sounds like this. All right, pretty simple. Now, the cymbals are a huge element in this style. They basically are doing 16th notes, 8th notes, quarter notes, or what's going to be called a trill, which is a really fast group of cymbals together. The cymbals are happening with the kick on 1, then the 8th note after 2, steady 8th notes through the measure, so 4 more. Second measure, it's an 8th note, then 2 16ths, 2 8th notes, an 8th, and then a 16, 16, 16, which are basically in time with 8th notes. I had those shorter because at some points in the song, I felt like it was doing a trill like this, which definitely sounds cool. But it was not all of the time, so that's why I shortened those. All right, so that covers the cymbal for the first 2 measures. The second measure, almost the same, happens on 1, happens on the 8th note after 2. That's exactly the same. The next 8th note. Then in the following 8th note, where we had just 1, we get this trill. And a trill is a fancy term for like really fast percussion sounds. That is happening on almost a 30-second note sequence. This is a little bit early. It doesn't matter with rhythms that are this fast. In fact, having them like less outside or slightly not perfect will make them feel even more natural. So it doesn't really matter that that's not a perfect 30-second note. Then we get the last 2 8th notes. That happened again. So it's almost the same rhythm, except in the place of the 3rd 8th note, there's that trill. All right, and then the final measure is literally the same as the second measure was. So cymbal on 1, 2 16ths, 2 8th notes in a row, then that 4 eighth notes in a row. And again, it's shorter because I shortened some of the eighth notes together for the trill. With drum sounds, because like a cymbal, if you hit a cymbal, it if it's a closed cymbal, it decays. The sound doesn't last for very long. So with MIDI, it doesn't really matter if like this is long or short. It's going to play the same sound because it's basically triggering a sample. Cool. So now let's hear the 808 and the drums on its own, and we'll watch the 808. This is what's happening. Really simple. So there's not as many 808s as you find in some songs. That kind of makes it have more impact or feels even bigger when it happens. This record is kind of like ethereal almost. It's a vibe, but it's not like super in your face. The notes that are happening are the first 3 notes of the scale: C, then B, down to the 1, A. Then it goes C, B, A, and then we get another A. Same spot that this happened. That's at the same time as the kick drum in that measure. That's really common in the style. We don't have an 808. Actually, let's check that. We have literally an 808 for every single kick drum. So, and that's really, really common in the style. I was thinking there was one kick that didn't have the 808. And so an 808 is basically a term for a pitched kick drum. It was also originally a drum machine that played more than just kick drums. But in modern production, when somebody says an 808, they're talking about like a pitched kick drum. And again, it is happening with the kick. So the kick kind of functions as just the punch or like the top end of the sound. Once again, it sounds like this. All right. Now, the way I'm playing this 808, I'm using a patch in Serum. This, I believe, was just built by Cymatics. I'm using Floor Shaker, but I'm doing a lot of the shaping of the sound. So not to make this too much of a tangent, but I'm rolling off a ton of the top notes. That's because this 808 had a lot of weird harmonics in it. I'm then compressing it, making it quite louder. Then I have it going to its own bus. This bus I call my trash bus. That's because I'm using isotope trash. So the EQ is cutting out low notes. Then it's going into the isotope trash. It's basically a distortion plugin. Then I'm using L2 by waves just to make that louder. And together, those 808s really mimic the one I heard in the original. So let's finish out. We'll watch that 808 again, but we'll hear the full instrumental. We need that melody. Here it is. All right, and then finally, you may be wondering about the ending instrument. It sounds like a Koto to me, which I don't have. My knowledge of like the history of instruments from around the world is really limited. I discovered the Koto by getting East West. I've done videos on East West plugins. I love their stuff, especially for things like this, world organic type sounds. The MIDI is doing the same thing. It's just triggering a different instrument. And again, I'm filtering it so it goes away, but here's what it sounds like. And if you listen to the ending of that song, you can hear that the instrument really feels different, and it creates kind of a cool outro. So this wasn't the most complicated song, but in many ways that's a good thing. Perhaps you've watched some of my other breakdowns, like perhaps Stay, Kid Leroy, and Justin Bieber, and I was talking about a mode, and that may have been too confusing. So this was a good opportunity to just keep it simple. Saw an instrumental that was in A minor. We saw chords that came from A minor. We didn't have a single note out of key, and saw some cool sound design. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, you'd help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel. Have fun making music, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.